everyone. So I'll start by saying that I had on my planner, my to-do list for today was to make this video, and I haven't been feeling well the last few days. I got my first vaccine for the coronavirus. I got it the other day, 2 days ago. And for those of you who have had it, you know, like the first 48 hours, my arm was like useless. It hurt really bad and gave me a little bit of a headache. And I was really tired, and I'm always tired, so it just made me even more tired. And as I was looking at my to-do list today, I thought, okay, you know, I have this video that I want to do, and I was like, I don't want to put makeup on. I don't want to draw my eyebrows on. And then I thought, maybe that's fine, because, you know, if I'm talking about the difficulties with cancer, then maybe that's something that I need to show you a little more often. I know in the other videos I typically have makeup, either a little bit or a medium amount. None today, like none. And the camera that I'm using softens me a little bit, so it probably doesn't look as bad on the video that does in real life, but I can see myself, like it don't look great, you know. But you can see my eyebrows. So I think I mentioned this in the chemo video that, you know, this eyebrow grew back, you know, 50%, and like the general outline's there, so that's fine. So even if I didn't want to draw eyebrows on, like it looks okay. This one you can see really kind of came in a lot more sparsely, and on the video it doesn't look as much. In real life, this one's like way more obvious, and this one just doesn't, it's barely there. And so typically I draw them on, you know, when I'm feeling like it. I don't feel the need to draw them on every day, but you know, I want to look symmetrical. So even sometimes if I'm like, I don't want to do full eyebrows, I'll just fill this one in a smidge just so that it just looks even. And you know, these giant circles under my eyes. Now that's something that comes with age, you know, but a lot of stuff happened with my body very quickly after chemotherapy and surgery and radiation. Maybe changes that would have come for me in a few more years, you know, have definitely happened now and very quickly. So, you know, so this is, you know, what I look like, and, you know. But today's video is going to be on radiation. So I have a, just like before, I have a little notebook. I just have a few things written down so I don't forget. So if I look down, you know what I'm looking at. But like I mentioned in the previous videos, if you're watching this one and you haven't watched any of the other videos about my cancer diagnosis, I suggest watching them just so you understand that I'm going through kind of like a timeline. I talked about my diagnosis, I did 2 videos on chemotherapy, and then I did a video on the surgery, and now I'm going to do one on the radiation, and then I will continue to do more. I'm going to do one, I mean, definitely I will be doing at least one on the side effects, maybe even 2, because there's quite a few, so I might split that up into 2, parts 1 and 2, and then I'll probably do one on the different medications. So there's a lot, and even then, like I feel like I could be doing like a vlog on this, like, because I know I mentioned this to you guys before, that I'm a PhD student, and I work. I have 2 jobs, 2 part-time jobs, and you know, in general, for a lot of people right now, life is just a little more hectic than usual. And so for me, working 2 jobs and trying to make progress slower, but I'm making progress in my PhD, it's so difficult. Not even just feeling like shit all the time, but the other day I was thinking about it. It's like, wow, I'm really struggling to get through my checklist every day. I know I'm tired, I know I'm sleeping a lot, and then I counted, and I was like, oh, that's why. In like a 19-day period or something, I had like 9 doctor's appointments. So, like, either I was like seeing a doctor or like getting my blood drawn or something. And then the following week, so this last week, I had like another 4. And next week I have 3. Like, so it's never ending. It's like I joke, but it is like having another job. Sometimes it's like a full-time job, sometimes it's like a part-time job, but it takes up so much of my time. And people don't realize it's like, okay, yeah, my appointment itself was, you know, 45 minutes. But I had to, you know, drive there, wait in the waiting room, drive home, felt like shit because I got, you know, an injection or whatever, had to like rest the rest of the day, or I fell asleep when I got home, you know what I mean? So it sometimes, and some days I'll have like 2 appointments, and that takes up my whole day because I have to, you know, prep for the appointment, drive there, you know, drive home, then go to the other one, and then I feel like sick, and you know, so I just have I don't think people realize that, like the time constraint alone, not even regarding like how I feel, but just the time constraint is sometimes just really overwhelming. That was kind of a tangent, but just kind of some of the thoughts in my head. So like I said, this one's going to be on the radiation. Now, I had mentioned before that for me, chemotherapy was the worst. It was horrible. And I know that's not everyone's experience who has chemo. In fact, there are some women in my support group who have had all three. They've had chemo, surgery, radiation, and they will say, chemo was bad, but it wasn't too bad. Radiation was way worse for me. And then I think, wow, like it was the opposite for me. So everyone definitely has their own experience. And I know I mentioned that with chemo, that for some of us, it's the most horrific thing we'll ever experience. And for other people, it's difficult, but it's not as hard as like another part of the process. So for me, radiation was probably the easiest part. It was really, I got the worst part of it over at the beginning. Chemo, second worst was surgery, and then third worst, which was tolerable, was radiation. So when I found out I had to get radiation, I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, is that, because I'm a reasonably intelligent person in the world, but like going into, being diagnosed with cancer, you learn so much, and things you had misconceptions about, or then, you realize how you were misinformed before, and then you just learn so much new terminology, and you just learn a lot. And so when I was going in for radiation, I didn't really know what to expect. And I met with my radiation oncologist, and he was the only male physician I had out of all my physicians. And so he's very sweet. And when I first met with him, I told him, like, I don't really know, like, what's going on. And so he explained the process to me, and he's like, basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you in this machine, and it's gonna rotate around you. So you just lay there, and treatments will be, around 20 to 40 minutes. He's like, we'll get a better idea once we go in, once we get some, like, they have to do like this, what's the word? Like intake, where they take measurements and see where the cancer is exactly, and then they measure it all out. It's very precise. And so he said, you'll come in every day. It's like Monday through Friday. You get the weekends off. And he said it'll be, I think he originally told me I would have 25 sessions. So that would be like 5 weeks, Monday through Friday, so that's 5 for every week. And so it'd be 5 weeks. And I thought, okay. And, luckily the appointments were shorter, but I still had to drive there. I had to drive home. I felt tired, especially after a while. I felt really tired. And also, like, they had to fit me in, and I happened to have a class that I was taking on campus. Luckily, campus and the radiation place, they weren't too far from each other, but I still would have to leave class early. And the instructor knew that, why I was leaving, but it was just like one more thing to interfere with my life, So anyway, so this intake, where they get these measurements and stuff from you, I didn't realize this at the time, and so it's just kind of the interesting part of it is you get tattooed. So they give you, like, everyone's different depending on like what type of cancer you have and where they're trying to administer the radiation. It's going to be different, like how many tattoos you get, but in general, they're going to take some measurements and they tattoo you. So when the machine, like with lasers, can use those as a guide. And so let me see if I can get this, if you can see this on camera. I tell everyone this is my smallest tattoo because I have many, but you can see it. It's right there, tiny one. And then I have 2 tiny ones like on the side, like by my ribs. And it's a tattoo. It's a real tattoo. They have this little, thing that they use for, because it's just like a little point. But I'll tell you, I've never had any tattoos on my chest, and that hurt. Luckily, it was just a moment, and the ones on the sides actually didn't hurt as much. I thought it would because it's like, fleshier there, but it didn't hurt as much. Anyway, so they do that, and then they put you in the machine, and they kind of they get some measurements and stuff, and then they make the appointment for you to actually go in for your actual treatment. Excuse me. So I go in, and you get undressed, or from the top up, and he had told me before, we have a very specific way we're going to guide the radiation to your body. Now, since it's in your chest and your arm, we want to avoid, obviously, your organs and your neck and your head, because, as many of you probably know, radiation can cause cancer. Now, as a side note to this, I've heard this, like, oh, don't get radiation, it causes cancer. Don't get chemo, it causes cancer. It's like, well, anything you do in the medical field, even just like getting, a flu shot, like there's always a risk, a minuscule risk for some things, maybe a higher risk for other things. there's always a risk to anything you do. So obviously be knowledgeable and aware of that. And if the risks for something, like if it's a, you know, experimental treatment, for example, the risks might be higher to you. But things that are more standardized, the risks are quite low. And obviously for something like cancer, most of the risk, like even the side effects, as bad as they were for me, as horrific as they were for me, and I don't know if I'd be able to do them again when I'm glad I did them, because it did get my cancer to, you know, I'm cancer free now. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so but I've heard this about radiations, like it causes, yeah, but not really the way people think. You know, I hear this joke like, oh, doctors will say, oh, you know, don't worry about, you know, getting an x-ray, and then they stand behind some, well, yeah, no shit. Like, because you're coming in, what, like once or twice a year for an x-ray or less. A lot of people don't even get them for years and years, you know. And those people do that every day, all day long. So of course they have to have a little extra protection. But for me going in for radiation, the chances of me getting radiation and it causing cancer is low. But it still is an issue. And they don't want to hit you unnecessarily in any area that they're not trying to target or treat with the radiation. So of course that makes sense. So, you know, he's explaining this to me. They're going to guide this thing is all set up in the machine with like my calculations and measurements. And so when I lay down, there's just certain points that look over the speaker, like, okay, hold your breath. You have to hold your breath for like 10 seconds, you know, and then, but most of it, you're just kind of laying there. It's not particular. It's not pain. Like the process isn't painful. You don't feel the laser or anything, you know, but you do get burns from it. And my radiation oncologist was telling me, he said, you know, everyone experiences it differently, but on average, what you'll have is probably like a really, really bad sunburn. He's like, imagine your worst sunburn. It'll be about like that. Some people it's a little more, some people it's a little less. He's like, you might have some burns that become like might scab or something, like depending on the sensitivity of the area, depending on the individual. And he let me know that for a lot of people who are heavier, they tend to have more problems with that. And I was like, you know, I'm very average, you know, size. And so he's like, you shouldn't have any issues with that. But he's like, you never know, just with every person's going to respond differently to it. So, and he said it would take after about the second week is when I would really start to see the burns. And he said after my very last treatment, I would probably continue to have burns for quite a few months afterwards. I had to be extra careful with like letting sun be exposed to the area. So like for most of you probably have experienced this where you have a really bad sunburn. Maybe you even got it last week, but if you go out into the sun and even just the heat of the sun, you're like, oh, like it hurts a lot, you know? And so it was like that. But because they were very specific, and I'll put a picture in the thumbnail, they were very specific about where they were hitting. I had this line down my chest. They did, you know, this area, and there was this line, and then it went a little onto my back and then down my side. But when I was in the heat of it, like, no pun intended, like, it was like someone had drawn, you know, a very specific like red line and filled it in. You know, it was a very precise area that was burned. And so, like I said, there were others besides the burn, which I'll get into in a second about how the extensive mine were. There were other side effects. The fatigue, you do get very tired. And I had been tired for like 6 months. So it wasn't anything I wasn't used to. And it definitely wasn't the same as like chemotherapy fatigue, where you're like, oh, I'm being poisoned, I'm dying. It's like, okay, it's bad. I'm definitely more than just a little tired. It's like you feel very weak. But for me, like I said, it wasn't as bad as the chemo. And so for anything that wasn't as bad as the chemo, I was like, okay, I can deal with this, you know. And so I went in, you know, every day, and that was the easy part, you know, just showing up, getting in the machine. And he would check in with me. I would see him like once a week. I'd have like a 10-minute, and he would just make sure everything was going well. And I got to my 23rd treatment, and so I had a couple more, or it was like my 21st, and so it was like my last week. And he said, I think we're gonna just do through Wednesday. I think you just need maybe 2 more after this, and I don't think you need to do 25. So I still had like 23, but I was like, okay, cool. Like, you know, anything a little easier on my life. And he's like, yeah, I think you're good. I think this is definitely helping. And like I said before, with the chemotherapy, it had shrunk my tumor, and with the surgery, they had removed it all. And because I get this question, like, why do you have to have all 3? Like, what's the purpose? You know, why do you have 1 after the cancer's technically gone? And it's like, well, they want to make sure, because even when they're testing it after they get it out of surgery and they want to get those clear margins, which I talked about in my surgery video, there's always the chance that there is still some lingering tiny cells, spots somewhere. And so they just want to be extra cautious, which is, I totally understand, which, you know, obviously I was like, yes, please, you know, make sure. And, you know, so that's why I had to have all three. And like I said before, I think in multiple videos, that it also depends on like you, like your age, your weight, what type of cancer you had, what stage, where it was located. So like all those things, you know, every oncologist will know like the specifics for what is best for you as a patient, depending on like, you know, 27 factors, you know. So, but to the burns. So the burns, like I said, they weren't too bad at first. It was like a really bad sunburn. And like my oncologist had said, the worst of it's going to be those last few weeks after your last treatment. And the burns will last for a while, but he's like, the worst of it will probably be that month following your very last treatment, because it takes a while for the body to like kind of catch up. And I was like, okay, so it's like that last week, and they're already pretty bad, and so I know, okay, it's going to get a little worse in this next month coming up. And they were bad. I mean, so like as a side note, before breast cancer, I hadn't worn a bra in like a few years. I just was like over it, and didn't want to keep binding my body for no reason. It was uncomfortable. And so luckily I think that helped me through cancer, that I didn't have to worry about anything extra like on my skin. And so, you know, going through with radiation, it's even more sensitive on the skin. And so I didn't have to worry about putting a bra on or anything, but even clothing would hurt. Like you guys know, like having a really bad sunburn, like a really bad one, like even clothing, even a t-shirt, like, oh, it's touching, it's rubbing the wrong way, you know. So it was still like daily, it was still difficult, it was still painful. But I think I was in my mind, I had the mentality of, this is the last thing I have to get through. It's not even as bad as the other stuff. I just got to get through this last part, you know. And my hair has started to grow back from chemo. So it started growing back about a month or so after chemo. And it was coming in, because I waited, let me say, so I waited a month. It was like 4 weeks between chemo and surgery, and then I had to wait like 4 weeks between surgery and radiation. It was give or take. So it had been about 2 months since my last chemo treatment. And so it was starting to come in. It definitely wasn't fully like, you know, there were still spots that were still kind of bald-ish, but it was definitely coming in. I was worried about that because some people their hair doesn't grow back after chemo. Like obviously I have this experience. My eyelashes didn't grow back for almost a year, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never gonna have eyelashes again. And I bought the glue-on, that sounds wrong. What are they called? Like the false eyelashes. And I was like, oh, okay, I spent $8. I'll figure this out. Everyone does this. It can't be that hard. And I spent 20 minutes. I was like, oh my God, like I can't do this, you know. I'm sure like it's one of those things, like, because I wear contacts and people always say, oh, I couldn't touch my eyes. Like, yeah, after the first couple times you figure it out. So I'm sure if I spent more time with the false eyelashes, I would have, you know, become an expert at it. But I think I was just over it. I'm like, who cares, you know. But like I did look really weird without eyelashes. And those didn't grow back for almost a year. I thought I was just never going to have them again. And luckily they came in, and they came in, when they first came in, they came in really thick, but they were about 1 centimeter long for like 6 months. And I was like, oh my God. And then finally they came. So it took a long time for my eyelashes, and all the rest of my body hair came in, you know, and my eyebrows, you know the story about that. My hair came in, I think I mentioned this in the chemo video. My hair came back, you know, after it really started coming in. It was clearly the same thickness, and the color had changed, sort of. Like I was already kind of going gray a little bit before chemo, but after chemo it was like 60% gray. And I tried dyeing it, you know, my natural color that it was coming in, you know, like a medium to dark brown, and I just hated the way the roots looked with all of the gray and silver. So I started going blonde because it like for those of you who I think this is definitely a thing with, especially with women, when your hair starts coming in gray, you go lighter because it hides that a little bit better. So that all worked out. Anyway, that was the side story, but back to the radiation. So I don't even know why I went on that tangent. I think there must have been a point. I forget. But so the burns, that last month after my last radiation, it was bad. And the skin was starting, you know, like when you get a bad sunburn and it starts to like peel, and you know, that's how it was starting to do. And I thought, okay, this is expected. And they walk you through like, this is what to expect. This is when you should worry. This is when you should call us. And I still had checkups, like a few after that. And as long as everything is going okay, then they spread out the checkups. Like, okay, we'll see you in a month, and then we'll see you in 3 months. And I even saw him like a year after, and then after that, I see him like every year for a couple of years just to make sure, you know. But so nothing was out of not normal, but it was still very uncomfortable. And this was right in the summer, so I finished my last treatment in May, and so I have the summer with the heat of Las Vegas, like on my skin. Even though I have clothing on, it was still like, oh god, like it hurt so much, you know. And then I want to be out at the pool or hanging out with my friends, and it's just like, be extra careful. After a while, it stopped hurting as much, but it still, you know, hurt. But the burns were really bad, especially like on the side of my breast where it's a little more tender, and sun doesn't usually hit that. Like, sun hits your chest a lot more, and so this area was like really red, but it didn't hurt as much. It was really just like in my armpit and like on the side of my breast and ribs. That was just so painful, and it was just red, and my nipple was not looking good, I'll say. And it got really crusty, like scabby. I hope this isn't like, maybe skip ahead if you don't want to hear this part, but it was like very like burned, very burned, and started scabbing over. And at one point I thought it was going to fall off, which has happened to people, and it was bad. And I talked to the doctor, he's like, it's bad, but it's not so bad. He's like, this isn't completely abnormal. Let's just keep, you know, moisturizing it. And by then I was done with the treatment, so it was like, it's only kind of get better from here. But it got bad, and it was discolored and scabby for like months. And like I said, I really thought I was gonna lose my nipple, which, you know, wouldn't have surprised me with my luck with all of this, but I didn't. It did heal. It was probably close to a year after my last radiation treatment that it finally was kind of back to normal. And so that was great. But I continued to see, you know, my radiation oncologist for those checkups. And he made a couple of comments. It was like the 6 month and then like the year. And then I saw him, I think, at like the 2 year mark. And even that long ago, or I mean, that long after, so that was like last year at some point, he said to me, he's like, you still have the burns? And I was like, yeah, is that normal? He was like, this far out? No. He's like, maybe a year, maybe, you know, maybe in certain areas, maybe you'll see. He's like, but I really haven't. He's like, you've healed. Like, at that point, it wasn't a burn. It was just discoloration. But it was still that line you could see, you know. And he said that he's never had a patient who, like 2 years out, still clearly had the radiation lines. And I told him, I was like, it doesn't hurt, you know. My nipple was still a little tender, but like it was basically like 90% back to normal. And but it was still obvious, like when I looked in the mirror, like clearly this whole side was still much darker and red, and even a little red than this side. And even though my nipple had healed, it was still, because of the discoloration, the color of the nipple and the color of the skin was so similar that it kind of just blended in, which, like, it was healthy, but aesthetically it just looked weird to me. And I was like, okay. And he's like, yeah, it shouldn't look like that. And so I was like, okay, you know, well, and what does that mean? And he's like, we're just gonna keep an eye on it, you know, let me know if anything changes. He's like, you're healing, it's just taking a lot longer. He's like, which is not a surprise given that your body has been through so much. He said, but you're definitely on the outer range of what I have seen with my patients. And so I'm like, I've had that experience with my surgery. If you guys watched my surgery video, it was the same thing. Like, of course it was going to be me who got, you know, who was the statistical outlier in something horrible. So, but what was I going to say about the? I think that's kind of it for the radiation. So, you know, like I said before, a lot of other people who've gone through radiation, it's probably much worse. And, I remember what I was going to say. Is that, and this I don't want to get too far ahead because this kind of leads into some of the side effect stuff. So, which I'll have a whole video on. So he told me, he's like, you know, your skin, and I don't know if it's going to show on the video, but I can kind of see. So, like, you know how when you do this and you touch your skin and it goes white or red depending on, you know, he said that my skin reaction wasn't as fast as it should be. It was definitely abnormal. And my regular oncologist had mentioned something similar. And I had still had, even 2 years out from from my surgery was still having a lot of pain in the surgical area, but also the surrounding areas of my arm especially. And both of them had commented on this, and they both were like, we need to get you into maybe like a second opinion on the surgery, because this far out, you shouldn't really be having these problems. And because I had so many things done, you know, chemo, well, one, like biopsy, a gazillion MRIs and CT scans and x-rays, you know, chemotherapy, 2 surgeries, radiation, like it's kind of hard to know, okay, there's this weird reaction, which thing can we attribute it to, you know? And so they both had mentioned, like, it seemed as if it was more likely related to the surgery, possibly the radiation, with some of these like skin related or nerve related issues I was having. It didn't seem to be related to the chemo, at least that area. So like I said, I'll talk about this in the side effects video, but just as kind of to lead up to that they definitely had commented on this, and they're like, we think we need to get you in because something else is going on. So it's like, you know, never ending for me. It's March right now. It's March 2021. I was diagnosed in September 2017, and I finished my radiation in May of 2018. So it's been like 3 years since the end of my treatment, just about 3 years. And it's still, like I told you, this last 2-3 weeks, I've had like almost 20 doctor's appointments. Now that's not all the time, but this is not uncommon for me, that it's still a constant thing all the time. And of course there are going to be problems that arise when you poison your body, when you cut it open multiple times, when you burn it, you know, there's going to be side effects to at least one, if not all of those things. So I'll talk about that in another video. So hopefully this was informative on the radiation. Like I said, you know, my experience with radiation wasn't too bad. It was very uncomfortable, and the burns, I mean, they hurt. They absolutely hurt. I think in my mind, when I think about it in isolation, I'm like, yeah, that was bad. But when I think about everything that I went through, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't even close at all to like what I went through in chemo. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, radiation was like, I could deal with that again, you know, if I had to. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next one, which I might just film after this, since I'm, you know, like on a roll a little bit, or where I will talk about the side effects.